Que ya viene la revolución, para que se asustan será pa' mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando, ¡viva la revolución!
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
La bestialidad imperialista. Bestialidad que no tiene una frontera determinada ni pertenece a un país determinado. Bestias fueron las hordas hitleristas, como bestias son los norteamericanos hoy, como bestias son los paracaidistas belgas, como bestias fueron los imperialistas franceses en Argelia. Porque es la naturaleza del imperialismo la que bestializa a los hombres, la que la convierte en fieras sedientas de sangre que están dispuestas a degollar, a asesinar, a destruir hasta la última imagen de un revolucionario, de un partidario de un régimen que haya caído bajo su bota o que luche por su libertad. Y la estatua que recuerda a Lumumba, hoy destruida pero mañana reconstruida, nos recuerda también en la historia trágica de ese mártir de la revolución del mundo, que no se puede confiar en el imperialismo, pero ni tantito así, nada.
De sombra, a sus bestias da el agua sedienta, a su campo una sombra muy sola, y contempla su cielo nublado y bendice su siembra tan triste, esperando en la noche tan negra los jinetes que parten al alba. El hombre que se llama hombre, remonta su alma en la noche y sus ojos, sus manos, su pueblo. Son ojos, son manos, son pueblos de hombre. Es el hombre, es el hombre, es el hombre. El hombre nuevo, en sus manos vacila la estrella, los corceles velos en el tiempo me han brindado una fiel compañera, bendiciendo el pan y el vino, contempla la paz de los muertos, su bandera es la nave del viento. Así nace el hombre del tiempo, el hombre que se llama hombre. Remonta su alma en la noche y sus ojos, sus manos, su pueblo. Son ojos, son manos, son pueblos de hombre. Es el hombre, es el hombre, es el hombre.
Long live the revolutionary legacy of our sisters and brothers in Chile. Long live the legacy of the MIR, the MIR, the Movimiento de Izquierda Revolucionaria, and the legacy of the FPMR, the Frente Patriótico Manuel Rodriguez. Chile, one of the most amazing revolutionary histories in Latin America and the Caribbean, if not the world, resisting empire, resisting colonialism, and fascism. What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 75, Unmasking Imperialism, Exposing Imperialist Propaganda in Mainstream Media. And today we're going to talk about Operation Condor. We've probably heard that name thrown around several times, and not a lot of us have actually dived deep into studying what exactly Operation Condor is. We will discuss the orchestrated campaign of violence by the U.S., by the Yankee imperialists, of repression in South America, which began in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and some would argue continues to this day. We shed light on Washington's support for right-wing military dictatorships in the region, especially in Chile. And we also talk about how the ideological remnants of Operation Condor are alive and well today, especially when we're talking about anti-communism and anti-workers' rights, anti-indigenous liberation. And joining me today are two compañeros I've spoken to and known for a while, both really great dudes. First off, compañero Bruno Fuentes, coming to us from Chile. Bruno is a writer for Revista de Frente, an independent revolutionary media outlet based in Santiago, Chile. Please like and support Revista de Frente. Amazing comrades out in Chile who do some revolutionary journalism in support of the people. Really great guy. Shout out to as well Nico with Revista de Frente. Just a really solid group of comrades doing great work. How's it going, compañero Bruno?
Good. I want to say honor y gloria a todos los caídos. Honor and glory to all of those who have fallen. Siempre presente. They will always be present here in our hearts and in the struggle. And happy to be here. Happy to be here with the Unmasking family and to share a bit of this history, this kind of forgotten part of the Cold War, especially in U.S. school curriculums. This chapter seems to be very forgotten and put aside and just seen as a bit of a collateral damage. When really it's much more it's much more deeper than that. It was much more the consequences were much more grave.
Most definitely. And Bruno is like a walking encyclopedia, man. He knows all the dates, names, figures. This guy's a genius. We did a podcast a while back called the history of socialism in Chile, and people still hit me up to this day. They're like, damn, Bruno, I learned so much about it. Even a lot of Chileans in the diaspora, a lot of Chilenos, like Chris, my homie Chris, and others who have all this beautiful revolutionary history and aren't aware of it, because once you come to Empire or Babylon, like I like to call it, they make you try to forget about where you're coming from, disconnect you from your roots. And for people to be able to rediscover their roots, learn about all these amazing, beautiful revolutionary history is an amazing thing to do. So I'm always pleasure to have Bruno on. And also joining us, last but not least, my compañero, my homie Chris, student and community organizer working with Freedom Mall, New Jersey, and also works with several other campaigns to free U.S.-held political prisoners and prisoners of war. Chris is a first-year graduate student at the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies at NYU. And Chris just sent me a hilarious-ass email. I'm not going to read names or anything, but one of his professors is like, the role of China and Brazil is reconfiguring imperialism. So me and Chris always crack up about the liberals in academia and their nonsense. How's it going, Chris?
And you know, people from my school watch this, right? You're gonna get me in trouble.
You're gonna get a letter in the mail.
All right, I'm gonna get my financial aid taken away.
Right.
I'm always glad to be here, man. You know, this is a topic that is very much under discussed. It honestly, like it feeds so much like the foundation of like why I even do anything related to what I do in my life, or like what even I want to study in academia or anything like that. Why I pursue this kind of access to information. And yeah, I mean, I hit you up, I think, the other day when you said that Bruno was going to be on. I was like, oh shit, that's the dude that did the history of socialism in Chile. Like, because, so I'm very glad to be here.
Cool, man. Most definitely. No, it's a pleasure speaking with both of y'all because Bruno, he's in Chile right now and he lived in the U.S. for some time, but his roots are firmly grounded in Chile. And Chris, obviously, your roots are in Chile as well, but you're representing more like the diaspora. You're familiar with the U.S. a lot in particular, especially a lot of your organizing. So I think it's a cool link to talk about this because in New York, a lot of the Chilenos that I known came to the U.S., their parents came to the U.S. in the 70s, right? And when we look back at why that is, we can directly link it to U.S. imperialism. We can directly link it to Operation Condor in particular. And that's why I think it's important to talk about these things because it directly impacts why people are like, why is it that, like Chris, like imagine if you would have stayed in Chile, like how different your life would have been, like why is it that you ended up in the U.S. and that's because of the U.S. So I think framing it that way, I think is really important, the interrelationship between imperialism and foreign policy and immigration. So just to quickly give an overview, Operation Condor was just a slice of the broader U.S. war, imperialist war against activists, communists, campesinos, indigenous people, Afro-Indigenous peoples in Latin America and the Caribbean. Obviously, the U.S. has been at war with the working class of Latin America and the Caribbean since time immemorial, the 1800s, 1700s, you can go back. But Operation Condor officially came about in 1975, officially, but we know that the foundations of it were laid so much earlier when we talk about the Red Scare, when we talk about the Monroe Doctrine, and especially after the Cuban Revolution, the fear of communism spreading throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. And it really got its steroid boost in 1973 after the U.S. orchestrated, planned, and carried out coup against Salvador Allende, the first Marxist leftist president of Chile, democratically elected. And so 2 years later, 1975, Operation Condor was officially launched with the right-wing dictatorships of the Southern Cone of South America. Southern Cone usually refers to Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, and also Paraguay as well was part of Operation Condor. We can list some of the main actors in Latin America and the Caribbean related to this. In Argentina, Jorge Rafael Videla. In Bolivia, Hugo Banzer. In Brazil, Emilio Merici. I'm going to butcher Brazil because my Portuguese is garbage. Ernesto Geisel. João Figueiredo. Ofelia will correct me next time, but in Chile, of course, Augusto Pinochet, who a lot of people are familiar with. Peru, Francisco Morales Bermúdez. Uruguay, Juan María Bordaberry, and so many others, countless others. So all of these right-wing military dictatorships were put into place by the U.S., and it was under these military dictatorships, of course, with the training, funding, and support of the U.S. and Washington, that thousands, tens of thousands of people were killed. The exact number is hard to know because a lot of people were disappeared, right? In Argentina, you still have to this day mothers and grandmothers who go to, I think it's the Plaza de Mayo, and protest and bring pictures of their disappeared relatives. So tens of thousands of deaths, some say 60,000 deaths, some say more. Tens of thousands of more disappeared. Thousands of people who are in prison, who are forced to go into exile in other countries. So a big deal. This is a big, huge deal that impacted a lot of the families, killed a lot of people, and almost nothing is known about it, right? When we talk about the U.S. spreading democracy and the U.S. being a force for good in the world, as Biden talks about, and Operation Condor is never mentioned. So just to kind of recap what I went over, I'm going to play a quick clip giving some more information about the overview of Operation Condor, and then we'll talk with the comrades about what exactly it means for the people of Latin America and the Caribbean.
In school, we learn about the Cold War. We learn about the space race, the embargoes, and the risk of a nuclear showdown. We learn that the Cold War was a period of global tension that was cold because the US and Soviet Union were not actually fighting. But for many countries in the global south, this war was bloody hot.
Las Fuerzas Armadas y Carabineros asumieron el gobierno.
Besides the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc, there was a large number of neutral countries that were not aligned. This included almost the entire continent of South America. These countries were a battleground for the Soviet Union and the United States. And in the 1960s, the Soviets were winning.
Porque un obrero sin trabajo, no importa que sea o no sea marxista, no importa que sea o no sea cristiano, no importa que no tenga ideología política, es un hombre que tiene derecho al trabajo y debemos dárselo nosotros.
Many of these countries were swaying to the left. But in the 1970s, the continent made a sudden and dramatic turn to the right. In just a matter of a few years, all of these governments were overthrown by right-wing dictators. They hunted down any left-wing sympathizer, and they did so with unprecedented levels of efficiency and cooperation. These dictators had built far-reaching alliances, where they would kill each other's enemies in their countries. A Bolivian president fled to Argentina and was killed by Argentine agents. Uruguayan activists fled to Brazil and were kidnapped and returned. South America had never seen such international cooperation before, and it was not limited to their continent. Their attacks reached as far as Italy, the United States, and France. And all of these countries were intimately aware of what these regimes were doing. And the West responded with firm handshakes. Thousands of CIA documents are now declassified, and they show how particularly the United States was involved in working with these regimes. While these dictators killed and tortured and disappeared thousands of people, they were providing the funding, training, and weapons to further their cause. After all, they were doing the dirty work in their Cold War against the left. These declassified documents reveal a story of how South America as we know it today was shaped, and that painfully enough, most of them got away with murder.
So that's a clip from Us and Now. You can tell, by the way, some of the slant is liberal. Obviously, that's with any sort of documentary they find on YouTube. But overall, there's some pretty interesting facts and figures that you can point to. Bruno, your thoughts on Operation Condor. How would you break it down for somebody who has never been to Latin America and the Caribbean, has no idea about the history of Chile or Latin America and the Caribbean? And what is the impact of Operation Condor on society today?
Well, Operation Condor, it basically was a sort of logical conclusion to what was to every single one of the counter-revolutionary movements that was happening in each one of these countries, in each Latin American country. Now, it's true, many of these countries had coups, and that's how these dictatorships got into power. But in many cases, there was an active and ever so more militant far right that was hitting the streets. In the case of Chile, from 1970 to 1973, there were fights with a group constantly with right-wing groups, especially one known as Patria y Libertad, Fatherland and Liberation. And this group then later on in the coup was kind of like, they worked as a sort of secret spy paramilitary group that would infiltrate left spaces and would kind of snitch on activists. So you have to think that it's the logical conclusion out of each one of these movements. At the same time, each one of these movements and each one of these counter-revolutions, because you have to see it as that. It's not just a coup. Each one of these weren't just a coup. They were counter-revolutions. They were mass movements. Here in Chile, there was a mass movement at the far right that was constantly clashing with socialists and workers every single day. Every single day here in Chile, like from 1970 to 1973, there was fistfights in front of the presidential palace. So you have to remember that, like Mao said, a revolution is not a dinner party. It cannot be so fine and elegant. That's what it was like here in Chile, and that's what it was like in many other countries as well. You had very strong counter-revolutionary movements. Now, another thing that was also happening at the same time was that many of the most revolutionary currents within the Southern Cone had been coordinating for a while. In the case of Chile, there was the group that you had named MIR, the Revolutionary Left Movement, that was coordinating with another group in Argentina, which were seen as their brother group, called ERP, El Ejército Revolucionario del Pueblo, the People's Revolutionary Army of Argentina, as well as the Tupamaros in Uruguay, kind of leftist urban guerrilla, as well as the ELN in Bolivia, because one kind of secret chapter there is that the People's Revolutionary Army of Argentina kind of helped rebuild Che's old guerrilla in Bolivia. So these four groups had been already coordinating with each other, and as in each one of these countries, like a coup would come, or there would be more repression to the left, many of these different groups would go into Chile. Chile was sort of like their base of operations, and sort of that has something. That is sort of like the reason why, when Pinochet got into power, it was kind of his interest to create a kind of transnational repressive operation, because revolutionaries were coordinating with each other. MIR was getting weapons from the ERP from Argentina. The ELN was getting training from the ERP in Argentina. Tupamaros, they were very good at bank robberies, and as well as kidnapping millionaires, such as Pepsi CEOs and whatnot. And they would send money to MIR, or money over to ERP, and ERP would also do that. ERP was really known for doing this, so much so that Pepsi made an actual office for them to negotiate kidnappings. This is a common thing that kept on going. So, when Chile fell, it was kind of like the big base of operations fell. And it was at that moment in which many of these groups started proclaiming that they would do kind of like a revolution throughout all of the Andes, such as what Che had been talking about before, just 5 years before. You have to think that for us it's 50 years ago. For them it was right there. So this is the reason why for Pinochet it was important for him to kind of create this coordination, because in Chile it's very easy for someone just to, if you live in the south of Chile, to slip into Argentina. You just slip in and out as much as you want. So that would be a reason why they had to coordinate with the Argentinian dictatorship there, or the counter-revolutionary forces over there, because Argentina had their coup a little bit later, kind of a couple. It was 1 or 2 years after that they had the coup on Perón's wife, and pretty much this wasn't a perfect marriage the whole way through, so to say. There would eventually be cracks within the relationships between each one of these governments. For example, in the case of Chile, we had a almost war with Argentina in around 1979, which was called El Conflicto Beagle, or the Beagle Conflict. Basically, it was a conflict for some islands in the most southern tip of South America. At the end, the Argentinians decided not to attack, and they decided to engage in a war to reclaim the Falkland Islands. And well, their loss of that war sort of ended up concluding the end of the Videla regime in many ways. So it wasn't always a perfect marriage in this case. There would be tensions between these countries, but either way, this whole process of counter-revolution, this whole counter-revolutionary operation was key in destroying a lot of what was the most revolutionary elements of in the most revolutionary organizations within Latin America. In the case of Chile with MIR, well, at first, Pinochet was more concerned in destroying Allende's party, was shattering it into pieces, the Partido Socialista. Because of that, Partido Socialista divided into 12 parts, and today it's sort of a big far cry from what it used to be under Allende. With MIR, they really pounded them into the dirt. The grace of MIR was that even though they would constantly be pounded into the dirt, they would always rise like a phoenix. They would eventually rise once, again, and again, and again, until the end of the dictatorship. I'd say 1979 would be the key year in which there would actually be fissures within these counter-revolutionary governments. In the case of Chile, it's when many of the revolutionary parties and organizations would come back to Chile to start organizing for the upcoming uprisings that would mark the 80s here. I would say it's also like close to the years in which kind of more revolutionary processes would pop up in other countries as well. And I'd say with the case of the consequences of Operation Condor, well, you have the obvious consequence of which thousands and thousands of families were just utterly decimated. You'd have some cases in which entire families, people's entire families would just poof. You'd never hear of them. Or like many years later, like the whole nuclear family would be destroyed. You have people who still are looking for their loved ones. And you also have the case here in Chile, and this also happens in Argentina, in Bolivia as well, but I know more of the details because I live here. Here in Chile, you have kind of not only amnesty, but you have comfort for the criminals who did these things. So what do I mean by comfort? The people who have been arrested for this, such as Manuel Contreras or I forget his name. He was another very important figure within the Pinochet's secret police, DINA. They are all kept in a place called Punta Peuco, which is supposed to be a prison, but in reality, it's more like a luxury hotel for anything. For being a prison, it's more like a luxury hotel. They have these nice beds. They get very high tier healthcare. They can have phone calls as much as they want. They don't have to pay anything. Like if you're in the US, you get thrown into prison. You have to sort of like scrape the floor for pennies to get phone calls for your family. No, they can go on the phone all day long. They have strong relationships with generals. Many of their children of the people who are in Punta Peuco are high-ranking military members of the Chilean military right now. And this happens also in Argentina. You have people who are if they got arrested, they have a kind of a luxury sentence, and this is something that people kind of really resent, because the arguments are that from the right is that, well, if we make it too cruel for these poor old grandpas, maybe there'll be less of these poor grandpas who would be willing to speak about their crimes. We've had a few cases in which there's been people who've had such immense regret that they have decided to turn themselves into the luxury prison. There was one case of one member of one armed forces member who he killed a priest. And at the moment in which he was going to kill the priest said, "Come, look at me, son. Look at me in the eyes." And the guy kind of asked, "Why? I'm going to kill you." And he said, "Look at me in the eyes so I can give you, para que te puedo dar el perdón, so I can forgive you." And it was because of that moment that this member of the armed forces sort of like he held it in for that whole time. You had some cases in which people like, sort of to say, they came to their senses and did and turned themselves in, but in many cases, no. In many cases, our transitions to democracy weren't. They were in the words of one of our presidents, President Elwin, "a la medida de lo posible." So that would be democracy as much as possible, transition as much as possible, justice as much as possible. So a lot of countries sort of try to whitewash their transition and say, this was a great transition, there was no blood. But just because there was no blood doesn't mean that there was justice.
Right. I think that's a great breakdown, man. Wow, that's crazy. And I think a good point that you hit on is the fact that a lot of these armies in South America, in particular, Argentina and Bolivia and Chile, the rulers from the military dictatorship era are still there and they're still in control. And so much attention, I think, is focused on the president and not enough on the militaries, especially Latin America and the Caribbean. We know that the armed forces usually determine a lot of what happens. We saw in Bolivia in 2019 what happened, right? When you don't restructure the army and clean house and get rid of some of the fascists who were in power during Operation Condor, they're very much still there today. Chris, obviously for you as somebody, as a Chileno in the U.S., as somebody whose family probably came to the U.S. because of Operation Condor and all of these different things, what has your experience been like connecting the state repression that you've seen, especially with political prisoners in the U.S., with what you've heard of and have studied back home in Chile?
Yeah, I think, well, my family actually originally came here beforehand, but then they couldn't go back. Once the coup happened, they were like, "Oh, that's probably not a good idea." But yeah. It's interesting because honestly, studying the history of Chile and learning from a very young age, about the coup and about what 9/11 means, a very different sense. Very much informed my politics and how I relate to contradictions that are within the United States empire. You look at Operation Condor and you look at the other regime change operations that the CIA conducted just within the decade of the 60s and then into the 70s and then continuing out the 20th century and into the 21st. You can see direct parallels with repression of revolutionary movements within the United States or within territories controlled by the United States government. At the same time as Operation Condor, you have not necessarily COINTELPRO, but the next program that once COINTELPRO was exposed, then the FBI went into very similar programs right after that and continued to pursue people who were involved with as covered in one of your in some of your previous episodes, people who were in the Black Panther Party, in the BLA, in Puerto Rican nationalist organizations, Chicano organizations, indigenous organizations in the United States. And so you have, with these massive waves of revolutionary movement, you also have the same motivation by empire, internally and externally, to not only destroy those organizations and those movements, but the memory of like the revolutionary traditions that carry them forward. That was the aim of like Pinochet in the United States. They terrorize people to the point where like it's not, they want the memory to not be inherited by the next generation. And the same thing was very much done within the United States as well. One of the stated aims of COINTELPRO was to prevent future generations from basically having any kind of revolutionary consciousness. And in that sense, part of it is to recolonize people who had risen up and taken part in the anti-colonial process.
Yeah, no, I think it's crazy, and a lot of the tactics are one and the same. And one thing I like to bring up to people is that a lot of this was under both Democrat and Republican presidents. A lot of people like to make the distinction. They're like, oh, the Democrats are the good guys. Biden would never do. And it's like, we look at the president. Who are the presidents during Operation Condor? Lyndon Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Gerald Ford, Carter, who's always upheld and heralded as some peace-loving guy. There's like the Jimmy Carter Center for Peace. Meanwhile, he's sending money to death squads and right-wing military dictatorships. And of course, Reagan. And this is bipartisan support for U.S. imperialism, for Operation Condor in South America. And I think one of the things that I think is important when talking about this is images. This is one image of a soccer stadium in Chile that was turned obviously from a soccer stadium to somewhere that people, leftist communists, people like us, even having this conversation right now, would be brought here to be murdered in front of everybody. Here you have the soldiers with their rifles, and you have onlookers checking to see what's going on, and a lot of times friends and family. Some really fucking crazy shit that is insane. The torture methods and tactics, especially of the Pinochet regime, insane stuff. And the U.S. was heralding him as some pro-democracy freedom fighter. And these kind of images, I mean, turning a soccer stadium into a torture center, into a mass murder location, it's just fucking nuts. And another image I wanted to share is this is an image of right-wing propaganda from Chile. Some of the anti-communist groups that Bruno was talking about: Escuela Única, Partido Único, Empresas del Estado, Esclavitud Comunista, todos contra la Escuela Nacional Unificada para defender a nuestros hijos. And basically saying, opposing the unified public educational system, defending our children. And it has a monster with the hammer and sickle on the head, with stuffing a kid into their pocket. So some of the early anti-communist propaganda that goes, way back, throwback. Another image that I want to share, kind of talking a little bit about some of the other main figures. One of the most fucking egregious actors of the Operation Condor is this guy that we're looking on the screen. This guy, his name is Nikolaus Barbie, and he is also known as the Butcher of Lion. And he was a Nazi. He was a Nazi from Germany who basically murdered, tortured, and killed communists, leftists, all sorts of people in France during World War II. He personally tortured a lot of people and also oversaw the mass murder of people in concentration camps. And this is kind of where you have the intersection between Operation Condor and Operation Paperclip, which is really fascinating to me, because this is one of the more unknown elements of U.S. imperialist history, where the U.S. brokered a deal as part of Operation Paperclip with Nazis to give them passage to Latin America, in particular to South America, And this guy, Klaus Barbie, the guy we're looking at, is one of them. He went to Bolivia, where in Bolivia, his new job was to teach them how to kill communists, teach them how to kill indigenous peoples, union activists. And he went to La Paz. He played a major role in the Bolivian coup led by Luis Garcia Mesa in 1980 that implemented a Operation Condor right-wing military dictatorship, tortured people, especially indigenous peoples in Bolivia. So here you have an actual example of the U.S. helping actual Nazi go to Bolivia, one of the most indigenous nations in the hemisphere, to murder and torture and kill indigenous communists in Bolivia. So Klaus Barbie, man, I mean, if you get a chance, look at his history. Like, this guy is a piece of shit. And he is this is what you're not going to hear in your U.S. history class, right? It's all about human rights and democracy. And also Alfredo Strasser in Paraguay, another country that was impacted by Operation Condor. He was somebody who, he came into power in 1954, much earlier, but he basically stayed in power until 1989. He was heralded as a democracy fighter. They never called him a dictator, obviously, because he bowed down before U.S. imperialism. And in Paraguay, which also has a large indigenous community, especially the Guarani people, Guarani nation, Stroessner was responsible for a lot of mass murders and death. So I just wanted to kind of share that because I think it's really important to talk about that. Here's another clip giving some more overview of some of the key facts and figures. Now talking a little bit about Chile, focusing on the coup, what happened, and we'll talk a little bit about the impact of the coup.
Lastly, in Chile. Chile was of particular interest to the United States. Let's go back a few years. In 1970, the leader of the Communist Party was trying to win the power of government fair and square for democratic elections. Something that had never been done before, but right now it seemed like he was actually going to win. And this posed a unique challenge for the White House. Assistant Secretary William D. Rogers 6 weeks before the election. After all we've said about the elections, if the first time a communist wins, the US tries to prevent the constitutional process from coming into play, we will look very bad. National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger, the president's view is to do the maximum possible to prevent an Allende takeover, but through Chilean sources and with a low posture. But then on election day, this telegram reached the White House. The subject, Allende wins. An emergency meeting was held between President Nixon, Kissinger, and their intelligence chiefs. Their notes say, 1 in 10 chance perhaps, but save Chile. 10 million available, more if necessary. Full-time job, best man we have. Make the economy scream. The United States had about $1 billion invested in the country, and Chile owed them $1.5 billion. Relatively, they had very little capital at risk. But Chile meant much more than that. You already know how this story ended with a coup and a dictator taking power, with the support of the United States being disputed. In a report that was first published in 2004 and last updated in 2011, they identified almost 30,000 victims of illegal detention and torture under Pinochet. That the government of the United States was friendly with the Chileans was no secret. One conversation that illustrates this dynamic particularly well is between Assistant Secretary William D. Rogers and Chile's foreign minister at the time of the dictatorship. They are talking about an investigation into human rights violations that the Chilean government had recently denied access. Rogers says that his view on the question of human rights is on 2 levels. One is that it's a total injustice, because nobody goes around making statements about what is going on in Kampala or in the Central African Republic. In other words, if the world doesn't care about those human rights violations, why would they care about them in Chile? He adds that he would be in great trouble when this is leaked to the papers. His other issue with helping Chile's government is that the present conditions are challenging, which is likely a reference to the investigation and the negative attention in the press at that time. But the secretary's tone is overall very friendly. He adds that, Anything to alleviate that situation and in a somewhat visible way would be enormously helpful. This would make it easier for the United States to support Chile at this moment. The foreign minister responds that any alleged violations are absolutely false and that he's absolutely convinced in his own conscience that they are not taking place. This amicable relationship quickly became subject to public scrutiny when the violence against civilians reached North America. A few years after Pinochet took power, he assassinated Orlando Letelier in Washington, D.C. Letelier was an outspoken critic of Pinochet, and he served as the Minister of Defense under Allende. The CIA reported to have convincing evidence that President Pinochet personally ordered his intelligence chief to carry out the murders, and that Pinochet decided to stonewall on the US investigation to hide his involvement. A second incident occurred in Santiago de Chile in 1986. 2 protesters were arrested and deliberately burned alive. One of them died, and he had a Canadian nationality. The other was a Chilean national, and she survived the attack. The Chilean government said that they burned themselves by accident, but the public believed otherwise. The intel from the United States confirmed that eyewitnesses had testified that army personnel was clearly involved.
Crazy, crazy stuff. They burned themselves on accident. Who believes that bullshit? But because it is a government that is in favor of U.S. imperialism, in favor of neoliberalism and capitalism, then they'll believe all of their nonsense. I do want to share, before I pass it to compañero Bruno, this is the evil genius. He looks like the bad guy in every movie. Dr. Evil himself, Milton Friedman, wearing a bow tie and some corny glasses. This is the guy that is responsible for the economic packages that were intended to make Chile's economy scream. The shock doctrine, as some have called it. This guy is Satan himself. Look at his face. I mean, he looks like, oh man. So I just wanted to share that. But Bruno, a lot of the language that they have in those documents, I always find those topics really interesting because it's like you have these internal conversations about how they're going to carry out these plans. And a lot of times when you say that to people, especially liberals, they're like, what are you, some kind of conspiracy theorist? And it's like, no, like they have these conversations in leaked documents, right? This happens all the time. Do we see something similar happening today with Operation Condor, especially when we're talking about how fearful they are of communists and the communist left?
So something similar. Well, I would say the most similar thing would be that, well, in the most recent elections in Chile, in the kind of final stage of elections, because here in Chile we have 3 stages of elections. The final one is done between 2 candidates. Both Gabriel Boric, who was the candidate for the kind of left-wing Frente Amplio, he went to go visit Washington before the final round of elections. And so did the ultra-right candidate, Jose Antonio Cast, who I remembered because you were talking about, what was his name? Klaus. And well, Klaus wasn't the only ex-Nazi that came to South America to escape his war crimes. There's also the Cast family. Jose Antonio Cast's grandfather is a Nazi war criminal who came to Chile to escape his war crimes. And his family was part of Patria y Libertad, Fatherland and Liberation, and they collaborated with the military junta to especially crush labor organizers in the countryside, peasant labor organizers. And I have a book on with some faces of some of the victims of that of the repression. Some of these could be even victims of the caste family, and well, you know, it's sort of a myth to say that it was just 50 years ago. Forget it. This guy who his family was directly linked with this operation. He was very close to winning last elections. No, Gabriel Boric won by 10 more points, but there was still like 40% of the vote that still went to caste.
Wow.
So he could win next elections. Maybe it all depends on how it goes for Boric. And I remember someone here in the comments commented, Operation Condor equals NED. Well, here's a bit of some juicy information. There's a bit of a strange relationship that Boric had. His ex-girlfriend is still an active member of the National Endowment for Democracy. Now, according to him, like they already finished, but according to him, like he says, no, it doesn't matter. We're still on good terms, and that's a bit suspicious for me. It's like, for example, if you were to be someone from the Pentagon and you were to hear someone like, oh, their ex-girlfriend was part of the KGB, and for them to say, don't worry, we're still on good terms, we're friends, don't worry about it.
Right.
That's the thing, and that's something that sort of rings a lot. That would started to ring a lot of alarm bells for me during the elections. And you can see Gabriel Boric, even though he has his famous saying, his narrative that he condeno la violencia venga donde venga. I condemned violence. It doesn't matter where it comes from, but he tends to condemn more the violence of the tyrannies that are against the U.S. than other ones. Sometimes he'll throw in Israel in there as well, but he kind of focuses on that. He's very good friends with who is it? The Chamorros in Nicaragua as well.
Yep.
And just recently, in the case of the Ukraine war, the special operation that's going over there, Boric sent millions of dollars that are in a fund that is supposed to go to poor and homeless people. He sent it to the Ukrainian government.
Wow.
And it's not like we just have bags of money just just lying around. He's actually supposed to be his whole campaign is supposed to be surrounded around various reforms that are not cheap. They're actually quite expensive. So what is he doing throwing money at the Ukrainians at this point? It's very suspicious, this. And well, I would say some of those are the big things that still hand over to today. Kind of going back to another point, thinking about another German name. Now that I remember the name of the person that I couldn't remember before, is who was very important in the Pinochet secret police. His name is Miguel Krasnov. I forget because it's I forget some German names. And this guy, he a couple of years ago, he had a special homage enacted to him by a branch of the Chilean armed forces, and he's actively now in Punta Peuco, in this luxury prison that I talked about. So a lot of this stuff is still going on. Another thing that I wanted to mention there, you showed a video of that's Miguel Krasnov. He was actually taught.
He looks like, wow.
He was actually taught in the School of the Americas, as well as Miguel Contreras, who we showed before. Those two were in the School of the Americas. They were both taught there. And going back to the point that you had shown a clip of that's the national stadium that you showed. I would go regularly to go see, the Chilean national soccer team. I would see them play with Colombia, Uruguay, and other teams. And they have a special part of the stadium where they kept the seats just like how they were in 1973. And above there it says something like a people without memory, or a people without a future. So they're still in, also for any game that's near the day of the 11th of September, players will go and they'll give bouquets of flowers to those seats, which are always empty, because those are for the people that didn't come back. And I also remember that just last week or so, there was some kind of construction going around the stadium, and they found bones. Wow. So literally, there's the bones of the victims of Operation Condor are still being dug up till today. And well, many families are kind of waiting to see, well, is this my husband? Is this my grandpa? Is this my uncle? Is this my brother?
Wow, that's crazy. No, to see that is insane. And there's so many monuments in Chile to this day that remain, that are commemorating the history of violence and also resistance. I think is insane to see how people are still finding bones. Chris, one thing I wanted to ask you is that you're somebody who we talk about all the time, how in many ways liberals can be even more anti-communist, more neocon than some of the right-wingers in the U.S. in particular, when it comes to anti-communism, especially in academia. By the way, Chris, are you in Bopster now in NYU?
Yeah, I am. I was in study room, but my time ran out on that. So
I recognize it, man. I spent so many nights there cramming for finals, drinking black coffee and smoking cigarettes outside of Bopes. So I definitely recognize there's probably some liberal hipster at the library now, like Russian imperialism, writing some thesis like Russian imperialism and Chinese imperialism. So like that's one of the things that I find interesting is like even today in the U.S. in particular, a lot of the liberals tend to be more anti-communist. They want war against Russia. They believe the whole pray for Ukraine bullshit. And in many ways, like I feel like the liberals and the Democrats are kind of like more dangerous than the right, the quote unquote right, because they have the veneer, the appearance, the aesthetic of being on the left. And I've heard many people critique Boric as well. Boric, or I'm not sure exactly how it's pronounced, but I wanted to ask
Boric
you.
Here.
Boric.
His name is actually Croatian, and his family came from Croatia after World War II, which is also suspicious because during World War II, there was a lot of Nazi collaborators in Croatia carrying out a war in Yugoslavia against the Serbians. So, the time that they came, and the fact that Boric is actually a name of a lot of money. They're one of the old families here, and a lot of the Croatian population here in Chile, a lot of them also have family with Nazi collaborators. Here, the number one billionaire here, the richest man in Chile, Luksic, Alejandro Luksic, his grandfather was a member of the Ustaše, the people that carried out part of the Holocaust. It was one of the parts of the Holocaust that was one of the most violent, so much so that when Heinrich Himmler went to go visit one of the concentration camps over there in Croatia, when he walked in, he instantly vomited because they were just killing babies, just smacking them against tables. So that's how sick they were, and that sort of leaves a lot of suspicion for Boric.
Definitely. I think honestly, man, like since he came out and he was talking shit about Venezuela and Cuba and Nicaragua and all this, in my opinion, I feel like he's controlled the opposition. But just to kind of wrap up here, because we have hit the hour mark and it's been really great talking to you guys. We'll start off with Chris and then we'll finish off with compañero Bruno. Chris, tell us a little bit about your thoughts on Boric and also how this ties into the broader liberal anti-communism.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. When you have a country that is so fascist like the United States, and then you have the United States helping to create those same conditions in other countries, when you have that political culture that is that fascist, and the fact that you have destroyed the left, and it's very difficult to actually have folks that have principled revolutionary positions, and so everything becomes very easily co-opted by quote unquote progressives. And so like the most left that you're going to get, with Boric is maybe like his few reforms that he wants to propose within the country. But even compared to like other folks who could still be defined as like maybe social democrats, but still have actual principles, like AMLO, like who defended Evo, who defended Venezuela, who defended, all these other countries in Cuba. You don't see that with Boric, and you don't see that with certain other folks as well. I mean, I had one student, one classmate of mine ask me, I was like, oh, well, what's the left like in the United States? And I'm like, well, it's hard to really say that it exists, and I think, again, one of the lasting legacies of Pinochet is the fact that the organizational capacity that was around when Allende was, came to power, that's not there anymore. Now you have, in a lot of cases, liberals taking advantage of popular mobilizations, and with these sorts of, they don't have the same revolutionary strategies or principles that was more commonplace when you can trace that tradition of revolutionary organizing. And I think there's a similar problem in other countries, including the United States, as a result of that massive repression that happened in the late 20th century.
Most definitely. And all the NYU liberals crunching their granola, they're going to be like so pissed off right now that you're giving away their secrets. The latte leftists drinking their soy lattes at NYU, writing about Russian imperialism. They're going to be pissed off. But no, that's very true, man. I mean, I think from the beginning, he was always very suspicious. And again, right, this is one of those things where if you bring it up to a lot of people, they're like, oh, you're crazy.
He's a student activist.
Conspiracy theory. Yeah, he's a student activist who came out of nowhere. And I don't know, I think like Bruno said, like there's a lot of weird missing pieces about his life and his family that we don't exactly know about.
Yeah.
But Bruno, to finish off, man, give us your thoughts on Boric. Where is the left in Chile today? And what is it like to be a communist in Chile today?
Well, in Chile, actually, I wanted to mention that I actually met Boric in person. You could, talking about how he would be a student activist. Well, there is some truth to that. Like years back when I got into university and I started going to protests, I actually met the guy. He would go to the street. You could just go up and talk to him, and he would answer anyone. You could give him that much merit, because then like the questions you would ask, the things that you would ask, like he would give some answers that would be kind of weird and vague, or that simply just didn't add up sometimes. He gave the time to answer, but and the thing is that he comes, I know this because I'm here and I actually saw the guy on the street. Boric comes from a political strain here in the left, of kind of liberal middle class suburbanites, and many of them that kind of sometimes adopt some kind of Marxist kind of narrative, but not the whole thing. Many of them, for example, will say to you that imperialism is a thing of the past. The coup was 50 years ago. Here I was laughing at here. You were saying that in In the U.S., there's a latte left. In Chile,
course.
we associate them with a neighborhood, kind of well-off middle-class neighborhood called Ñuñoa. So we call them the Ñuñoa left, the Ñuñoainos.
Ñuñoa left. That's hilarious.
So, it rhymes with ñoño, which is sort of like wimpy.
Right. Ñoño, the Ñuñoa left.
Yeah,
it's international, man. The soy latte liberals is international.
Yeah, so basically they have, for example, a lot of these sections of this of the Ñuñoa left, they have adopted a lot of the image of Allende, for example. So that's what you'd see Boric, for example, when he walked into the presidential palace, he first saluted the statue of Allende that we have right in front of that palace, and then he went into the palace, which for the media was like, oh my gosh, it's the coming of communism in Chile. It's like that photo, like against Allende's public education reforms. Like, oh no, our poor children, all the shelves will be empty and blah blah blah. Well, that hasn't really happened, but none of that has happened. He hasn't become a communist. Nothing has come off the shelves, but nothing has gotten better either. It's been a bit of the same. Also, a lot of his responses, for example, to the many recent protests, because some context here. In Chile, we have a welfare check for poor students from the ghetto that can't make ends meet, and the check is to give them food. It's called the Junaeb. So the Junaeb hasn't been actualized in more than a decade. The last time that they rose up the Junaeb to make it stick with inflation was when there was still Blockbuster. So there was a big protest here in Chile. There were some kids that got shot by police. The cartel, some members of the cartel also attacked a lot of kids. I was there. There was a lot of kids that got stabbed. One kid got his head crushed by 7 cartel members attacking him. And Boric, being having his origins in the student movement, his response was that, okay, I'm gonna raise the Junaeb by $5. And that was it. And $5 extra doesn't do anything. It doesn't help kids, pay for their lunches,
Right.
Chilean
pesos. By the way, sorry to interrupt you. For people who are unaware of the way Chilean pesos work, like it's not like $5. Like 5 Chilean pesos it's like compared to 5. It's like nothing. It's like pennies compared to relative to the currency, right?
Yeah, and it still doesn't adjust to the inflation right here. So so the Junaeb is going around like 36,000 pesos, but what you actually need are 47,000 pesos. So by the end of the month, like, kids are just scratching by and just trying to make ends meet. One of our slogans is apuro pan, apuro té, así no tiene la Junaeb. So for a lot of kids, it's just they're just making it by like buying single packets of tea and getting one slice of bread.
Oh my god!
So that's how things are like here. Boric didn't answer he didn't make a proclamation against the police that shot against students that were middle schoolers, that were minors. Nor did he say anything about the cartel, in which there was also a video circulating around that one of the cartel members was stopped by police, and the police released him and directed him to go talk with the media, with live television. So there was on live television open collaboration between police and cartel.
Wow.
And he didn't say anything about that. And they were attacking students, middle schoolers, high schoolers. So so much for being a man of his roots. That's what I have to say.
He reminds me of like the Chilean AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, like coming out with this Marxist rhetoric, leftist, socialist, and at the end of the day, opposing all actually existing socialism around the world, supporting fascists in Ukraine, supporting fascists in Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. To me, when he came out, I tried to give people the benefit of the doubt, but it wasn't long before I was like, all right, this guy Boric is very suspicious and unfortunately is promoting. I think, in my opinion, I think liberals like him are even more dangerous in their anti-communism because they're approaching it from this fake left or this fake progressive appearance. Like Chris said earlier in the chat, like the democracy, he had a great comment. Democracy now leftist love Allende because he was overthrown. None of that same allegiance is given to actually existing revolutionary processes. Most definitely, I couldn't agree more. Comrades, it's been really great speaking with y'all. It's been an hour and 11 minutes. I'd love to have y'all back on soon to talk more about Latin America and communism and Chile and all other operations, because Operation Condor is just one of many horrible fucking operations by the U.S. Operation Paperclip, MK Ultra, COINTELPRO. There's so many others. Me and Chris did an episode the other day about COINTELPRO. So it's crazy. It's crazy, but it's not taught in schools, and this is why we're talking about this now, because some people may not even have heard of Operation Condor when it happened, and the fact that tens of thousands of people died. Peace out, comrades. I really appreciated having you on. Bruno, it's been a pleasure as always, brother. And you too, Chris. Good luck with the liberals at NYU. They're going to probably beat you up after with their yoga mats after you get out the library. It's been a real pleasure, fellas. Thank you, everybody, for watching, listening. We're going to go out to some more revolutionary music from Chile. Peace, everybody. Have a great day.
La clara misión de decirle al conjunto del pueblo que han tomado ya su decisión. No habrá vallas, ni ríos, ni puertas que el obrero no pueda cruzar, conducidos por una vanguardia que los lleve al poder popular. Trabajadores al poder, 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 trabajadores al poder. Desde el fondo del pueblo ha surgido una voz de justicia social. Son los pobres del mundo que avanzan, como ejemplo tienen